Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us. So when we talk about AI, we tend to talk about software. OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, these are all software companies. And we sort of get software. It's intuitive. You don't need to understand a neural network to use a chatbot. And because of that, the story of AI has really become a story about AI software. But you can't really understand AI without understanding the hardware too, which in essence means you need to understand one company, NVIDIA. Around 80% of AI tools run on NVIDIA hardware. They're the only company in the world that's able to produce the most advanced AI chips at scale, the ones training cutting-edge frontier models. At the time of this recording, they're the most valuable company in the world. And at the center of NVIDIA is Jensen Huang. Unlike some of the CEOs on the software side, Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Huang is sort of an enigma. He doesn't have social media, and until recently, he didn't do interviews. And yet he's quietly building what might be the most transformational technology the world has ever seen. So who is Jensen Huang? Stephen Witt has tried to answer that question in his new book, The Thinking Machine, Jensen Huang, NVIDIA, and the World's Most Coveted Microchip. It just won the Financial Times and Schroeder's Business Book of the Year award. So I wanted to have Stephen on. I wanted to know what motivates Huang, and to try and get a sense of the future he's building. But really, I wanted to know whether we have a say in this future, or if this is Jensen Huang's world now, and we're all just along for the ride. Stephen Witt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I mean, just to start, Jensen Huang isn't one of those big tech personalities we're used to seeing biographies of, like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. What made you write a book about this guy?
Well, he's the CEO of the single most valuable company in the world. I think Jensen actually...
And that feels like a good enough reason in and of itself.
That was actually not true when I started writing the book.
I was going to say, well, how soon did you start
while
this?
I was writing it. It started out as a profile in the New Yorker of a company that I had followed for many years, but only really knew from their gaming products. And when I revisited it in the early 2020s, I was like, oh my God, these guys have completely transformed themselves. And my guess, I really hadn't followed the story at that time, I was like, well, maybe they got a new CEO or something. And then I looked in and I was like, oh my God, the same person has run this company for 30 years, founded it.
The longest running, right? Yeah. CEO of a tech company.
Longest running tech CEO in the S&P 500. Founded it at Denny's in 1993 and has just been there ever since. And he really transformed this company from essentially a rinky-dink vendor of video game accessories into the colossus of AI. I mean, Jensen is now the emperor of AI. I think now in certain circles, Jensen does have name recognition that's equivalent to Steve Jobs. It's certainly true in Asia. You go to China, you go to Taiwan, he is as popular as Steve Jobs was at his peak. Probably not quite in the US because he doesn't really make a consumer-facing product. But for anyone involved in tech or finance or business, they're going to know who this guy is. He is the CEO of our time.
He seems to be building a persona too. I mean,
absolutely.
You get the sense he's like putting himself out in a different way. The way he looks, the way he talks, the way he positions himself in the AI debate.
Yeah. So, Jensen didn't wear a leather jacket most of his career. That kind of came along when he turned 50. And when AI was starting to be a thing, he sort of was in the middle of a evolving glow up anyway. And I think this makeover was orchestrated at least in part by his daughter, who is at that time an executive at Louis Vuitton.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She now works for NVIDIA, but at that time she was in the fashion industry. His wife is also in the fashion. She dresses quite well. So I think they pushed him from going to be kind of like a dweeby corporate wardrobe, which is what he wore for the beginning of his career, with like these very thickly starched shirts that didn't kind of the ill-fitting like corporate gear into something more fashionable. But Jensen, he's not like Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had that outfit that he would wear every day, and he just sort of selected it as kind of his vision for what he should look like. Jensen's much more of an engineer. He's going to A/B test his wardrobe. He's going to swap in different pieces, see if they work with what the image he wants to project, and swap them out. So if you watch carefully, it's not quite a uniform. He's actually constantly experimenting with it.
I mean, that sort of represents his philosophy too, right? He's a bit of an A/B tester of everything and thinks of the world as like an engineer.
Pretty much every single thing in his life is done this way. How he runs his company, how he interacts with, say, Donald Trump, that's A/B testing. In fact, one of my first questions to Jensen was there anything in your world that you don't think about this way, that you don't approach from an engineering perspective? And the question kind of took him back, and he didn't immediately have an answer. The next time I spoke to him, he's like, I don't think about my family this way.
Well, that's interesting. But they think about how I dress that way. But I don't think about them that
Maybe
way.
so.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah. So it seems like different people you spoke to about him describe him in very different ways.
Yes.
And I mean, I wonder which one you saw when you first interviewed him. Which Jensen did you see?
I did not see the gentle family man. I heard about that from his friends and family. I personally did not witness that. I witnessed Jensen the shark. Jensen, the corporate executive who will do anything to succeed. That was the Jensen I met, the one I interacted with. I also saw Jensen the showman, Jensen the performer, the charismatic guy on stage. He's very good on stage. But I did see behind the veil a little bit there. One time with Jensen, I was watching him go on stage, and I was actually sort of in the green room beforehand standing with him. And he's talking to me, and he starts to rock back and forth and kind of crack these nervous jokes. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is nervous. He's nervous to go on stage, and he is excellent on stage, but he is nervous to go on stage and present to all these people. And he told me he was just like,
years.
He was just like, I hate public speaking. I hate it. I can't sleep the night before I have to do public speaking. And it was true. I couldn't believe it. So everything you see on stage, that's a performance. That's the showman in Jensen, but he's very good at that part too. Again, A/B testing. I think he's practiced a lot of different things over the years and gotten good at it.
What drives him? Does he have a philosophy or an ideology or an aspiration? Or
neurosis? I mean, fear, guilt, negative emotions, fear of failure. He said this himself. I mean, it's really fear of failure. It's guilt of letting down his employees, letting down his company, shame, the idea that NVIDIA might fail or that his family would sort of feel bad about him. I mean, he's more neurotic than any CEO. I think this exists. I can confirm listeners' suspicion that most CEOs are driven by ego, right? They're driven by fantasies of power and egomania and desire for money and greed, everything you would expect. That's not so true for Jensen, actually.
But he's driven by success. I mean, he wants to succeed.
No, he wants not to fail. If that's a different, a slightly different thing.
I think it's a fundamentally different one.
Yeah, he wants very much not to fail. I mean, obviously, there's a level of ambition there, right? If he's founding this company, if he's driving so hard, he wants to make his mark on the world. But he's really driven by fear of failure. He hates losing, just hates it. I think much more than he enjoys succeeding.
So how does that shape his company and the products he chooses to develop or not?
So this is the operating philosophy at NVIDIA, that every employee more or less has to treat the company as if they are 30 days from going out of business.
Wow. And
that has actually been true several times in NVIDIA's history. It isn't true right now, but being on top of in any business, but especially the microchip industry, especially the semiconductor industry, is no guarantee that you will be on top one business cycle from now. No industry is more vulnerable to change, I think, and to disruption. And Jensen knows that better than anyone. So he needs to, even though he's now this kind of like towering figure and has this big company, he needs to keep it as nimble as possible, to pivot like a startup. And to constantly reinvent what they're doing. And for Jensen, that means acting as if the company is about to fail and acting with the desperation. Very early in NVIDIA's history, they did almost go bankrupt. And Jensen just took this crazy gamble. And I think they were running out of money. They literally, I think, were delaying paying the electric bill and stuff. Like it was about to go under. And what he managed to rescue it, and what he learned from that experience was that he always had to act that way. Even when he was succeeding, that was the only guarantee of success.
Well, let's talk a bit about that history then, because they didn't begin, I mean, as you said, they've been around for over 30 years, and they didn't begin as an AI company. They were a gaming company. So what did they initially build and for what purpose?
they weren't quite a gaming company. What they were always were ace microchip designers.
Okay.
Gaming was the market they targeted, but they actually were not building like video games per se.
No, of course.
They were building an accessory for video games, but they really didn't approach it with a gamer's mindset. They approached it with a microchip engineer's mindset. The graphics processing unit, the thing they invented, the thing they named, was one of the most sophisticated kinds of microchips you could build. And this had always been true of Jensen, even going back into his 20s when he worked at a different firm. He always went to his toughest customer. And he always said, what's your biggest request, the hardest thing that nobody else can do? Let me see if I can do it. Now, at the time, that was rendering three-dimensional graphics. So if you remember, readers of a certain age or listeners of a certain age will remember kind of early Nintendo, Super Nintendo, that was a kind of 2D scrolling platform. It evolved with the Nintendo 64 into a 3D motion platform where you could really move around in a scene.
And that required a different level of processing.
A different level of processing completely. Without getting too far into art history, what we're trying to do is get a perspective, okay? And perspective was invented by a Renaissance artist named Brunelleschi. He also designed the Dome in Florence. But we have to do it with pixels, and that's kind of pointillism. And then we have to do that 60 frames a second, or 30 frames a second. We have to do that 30 times a second. And so the graphics processing unit must constantly readjust its perspective while drawing individual pixels in the scene. And this requires an enormous amount of computation in mathematics. It's quite difficult to do. And this is what attracted Jensen and his colleagues to the problem. Not so much that they were gamers, but that this was just really hard. And they loved solving these hard technical challenges.
But there were some inventions in some ways as he frames it along the way, right? Like he sees himself as having invented new things, new products almost. And so what were some of those major changes?
The major step, so the first thing they built was an innovative graphics processing unit with all sorts of fancy features, and it flopped. It completely flopped, and the company almost went bankrupt. And this was what I was talking about. They really were 30 days away from bankruptcy because their first product was just a dud. And they had to pivot. And Jensen pivoted to building commodity hardware. And he said, the only way this company can survive is if we try and make a knockoff graphics card, but beat our competitors to market. So that's what they did. And then they sort of established a foothold, and they're like, okay, well, if this commodity stuff, this is a race to the bottom. So we have to do something innovative. What are we going to do? What they decided to do was the game designers were making increasingly sophisticated games with multiple lighting sources in the scene. So if you can imagine, I'm running around in Doom with my gun, and there's kind of lights along the corridor, and then I shoot the gun and it creates a muzzle flash. Wouldn't it be nice if both the muzzle flash and the lighting in the corridor lit the scene at the same time? That would be more realistic. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So how are you going to do that? Well, there's two ways to do it. One is to add a second microchip to your graphics card to do two processes at once. The problem there is, what if we want to add 3 or 4 or 10 lighting sources to the scene? Then suddenly we're tiling the card. And in fact, some people tried to do this, tile the card with graphics chips. Jensen decided to do it a different way. Instead, they did what was called parallel processing, where the one microchip did both light sources at once. Now, this was very tricky to program. It was very difficult to execute, very difficult to make this work. In fact, the only other place it was ever used was in supercomputing. People had tried in the past to do parallel computing microchips, and they'd always been duds. They'd always failed because they were just too hard to program. You couldn't convince the programmers to go along with it. But the video game designers were so interested in the fidelity of the graphics that they learned how to use this system. And that was Jensen's first real innovation. It came along around 1998. It actually set the stage for everything to come, including AI, although Jensen could never have known that at the time. What we're doing here is an Intel CPU just does one math problem at a time. The NVIDIA GPU can split that math problem into 2 or 4 or 100 math problems, solve them all in parallel at once.
It seems clear he saw some value in this kind of computing or supercomputing before there was a market for it, right? And it evolved out of the gaming. The market was relatively limited. But what did he see that others didn't in that capacity, and what it could be used for?
Great question. They had tried this before. A number of companies had tried this before. All of them had failed. As Jensen has said, the road to parallel computing was littered with corpses, and they had to walk by those corpses on their way to building a successful product. So what did they see? What they saw was that for graphics, and especially for 3D graphics, there was going to be infinite demand. Once you got your soundboard to the quality of a CD audio, there was nowhere to go. Your printer, it has only a limited amount of capacity. But for rendering 3D graphics, no matter how much computing power you throw at this problem, the user is going to come back, and especially there's a certain kind of like hardcore gaming user who's going to come back and ask for more. There'd always be more demand for better graphics. This demand curve was infinite, and that's what they saw that I think a lot of people in the industry missed.
Okay, so they've built this capacity, and it's for the processing of graphics. And like, how does that translate to AI? Like, when did they become an AI company, and why is that useful for the kind of AI we now do? Okay, let's go back in time. Now we're in 2003. NVIDIA has won the gaming awards. They've produced the most innovative products. They're parallel computing. They were the first to that. There were 70 companies trying to build this. Now there's basically 2. It's a knife fight, and Jensen has won. Who's the other one? Just for AMD, or at the time, ATI was the name of the other company. But basically, there had been dozens of these companies. They'd all been absorbed and killed by NVIDIA. So Jensen has won the knife fight. And what he has learned from this is that knife fights are traumatic, and he should never get in one again. He never wants to get into any kind of industry where there's 70 competitors. He's never going to do that again. So now he's trying to look for industries where he will be the only participant. Simultaneously, what is happening is that there are research scientists who are looking at this parallel computing structure in the GPU, and they're saying, gosh, this circuitry is really powerful. Certainly, there's got to be a better use for some of this stuff than just rendering monsters and gunshots and car chases, right? And scientists are actually buying Jensen's hardware and then bootlegging it, hacking it to run more sophisticated stuff like financial modeling and even quantum physics simulations. And Jensen says, well, that's interesting. That's a new market. Why don't rather than hacking this stuff, why don't I build these guys a platform? So Jensen builds this scientific computing platform called CUDA, and then he ships it with every gaming card, even the ones he's selling at Best Buy. Okay, even the ones he's selling to gamers have this capacity where there's a switch on the back, and you basically flick the switch, and this thing turns into a low-budget supercomputer. Now, Wall Street hated this idea. They hated it because it cost... Because the market wasn't big? Tiny little market. A bunch of researchers who want to experiment with new computing capacity, and that was it. Who is this for? Who is CUDA for? Well, it's not really for established scientists because those guys can afford time on a research supercomputer. It's for marginalized scientists who can't get that access and who have limited funding for their research. Right. It's for mad scientists. It's a tool for mad scientists. It's a tool for marginalized scientists to access supercomputing structures. Now, that's a teensy tiny little market. It's not even most of the high-performing computing market. Jensen has called it the $0 billion market. You build a product with lots of capacity, but basically no real customers. And it takes forever, and it's extremely expensive, and Jensen spent 10 years doing this. So they were trying to market CUDA. They looked at oil prospecting, medical imaging, and they make this huge list of potential applications. Guess what's not on that list? AI. AI is not on that list. They don't see it coming. They don't know they need it. And the AI guys also don't know that they need these GPUs, right? It's not part of their, they don't understand that they need that. But at the time, they're sort of fringe, right? They're kind of the mad, in your mad scientist category. Precisely. In fact, not only is AI fringe, the thing that ends up working in AI is a kind of thing called a neural network. This is a parallel track. It's being developed completely parallel from NVIDIA. NVIDIA does not have any interest in neural networks, and the neural network guys have basically no interest in GPUs. This was extremely unpopular. It was less popular than parallel computing. I have a copy of the 2011 Introduction to AI textbook, which is by Norvig and Russell. It's over 1,000 pages long, 1,100 pages long. In that 1,000-page textbook on state-of-the-art AI from 2011, there are 10 pages about neural networks. Not only was AI not popular,
Within AI, this was viewed as almost a discredited field that no one participated in.
Except a few Canadians.
A few Canadians. Actually, it's not an accident that they were Canadians. In fact, they were mostly European, but it's not an accident that it was in Canada. In the US, Marvin Minsky, who was the kind of godfather of AI at MIT, discouraged research in neural networks and actually squashed a ton of it, directed funding away from it. He had worked on neural networks early in his career and was convinced that they could never make a successful AI. So it's not an accident that almost all the pioneers were Canadian and Europeans. In the US, there was it was hard to get this stuff off the ground. You were really discouraged strongly from studying it. So these mad scientists in Canada start working with neural networks. They're making progress, but they're not quite state of the art. And then one of them says, well, what if we ported this neural network training paradigm to one of these fancy graphics cards? Because I have this CUDA tool that I can do that with. And they start to make progress. And then in 2012, the Canadian group, and particularly a crack programmer called Alex Krzyzewski, builds a neural net that's basically 10% better than any AI has ever existed. And this is a field in which progress has heretofore been measured in fractions of a percent. Once they put this thing on NVIDIA's hardware, it is turbocharged and it breaks every record in AI, and within months has engineered a paradigm shift.
And this is Hinton and Sutskever and his student,
Hinton and Sutskever,
right? Who are now giants of AI.
Well, it was Hinton, Sutskever, but especially Krzyzewski, who actually is a mysterious figure who has left the field. He was the one who programmed this thing. And not only that, he purchased, I think with his graduate student housing stipend, 2 $500 NVIDIA cards, basically off Best Buy, set them up in a little rig in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house, and ran it for a week. The way to think about this, maybe, is that Jensen is building these propellers. And he's building bigger and more powerful propellers. And he's trying to sell them to the boat industry. And the boat industry is like, well, you already have a propeller. We don't need this thing. Meanwhile, over in Toronto, the neural network guys have this glider, and they keep pushing it off a cliff, and it keeps falling to the ground. And they're saying, oh, what could ever make this thing fly? What could possibly make this thing fly? And then Krzyzewski attaches the GPU, which is the propeller, to the wings of this glider, which is the neural net, and the thing flies for the first time. It's very much like that.
Jensen seems to see the power in this and the potential very quickly.
Immediately.
And you describe it happens in a weekend almost. He makes a decision that this is his future.
It took maybe 6 to 9 months for the news of this AlexNet breakthrough to filter up to Jensen. So AlexNet debuted in October or roughly late 2012. If you look at Jensen's GTC conference at 2013, he does not mention AI, and that's in March of 2013. March of 2014, 1 year later, he's in there. He's now wearing the leather jacket. AI is the only thing he's talking about. So somewhere in there between 2013 and 2014, within a year of the debut of this AlexNet thing, Jensen had an epiphany that not only could you use these neural nets to solve the problem of computer vision, which is what Krzyzewski worked on, but you should, from first principles, be able to use these neural nets to solve almost any problem. That was a huge insight. That was 2013 and 2014. And not only that, but Jensen had the insight that, okay, these guys used 2 NVIDIA cards to train this, but they should have used 2,000 or 20,000. And that as we scale the computing power available to these neural nets upwards, we won't hit a limit. And this was the thing they were always looking for with CUDA. The same profile as graphics. Just as in this 3D graphics, the infinite demand curve. Jensen believed, and his lieutenants believed, that intelligence would have the same demand curve. No matter how much computing power we threw at the problem of intelligence, the AI guys would always come back and ask for more.
Which is precisely the moment we're in now.
It's a great insight to have.
Scaling compute, right?
12 or 13
remarkable,
years
right?
ago. Very insightful. This is why people call Jensen a visionary. It's these kind of insights.
Clearly. There was clearly that moment of that spark, right? Do you have a sense of how that changed him as a person? Like this pivot to AI and this moment of clarity and shift in the company?
Yeah, I do believe Jensen would have done anything to succeed. I think if it turned out the most profitable thing NVIDIA could do was sell orange juice, I think they would have started selling orange juice. He is ultimately a businessman. But AI is a transformative technology, and Jensen is also a technologist. And so it just was like, oh my God, not only is there a tremendous business opportunity here, this is a paradigm shift. This is a revolution this is a new industrial revolution that I can be at the center of. And for a technology guy like Jensen, it's totally invigorating. Jensen did not change that much, but I think he basically, at the time that AI came along, Jensen had already been the CEO of NVIDIA for 20 years. He was 50 years old and his children were fully grown. And I think, before he had hobbies, he'd been a good dad by all accounts, if a very busy one. But I think he realized he could just abandon everything and just devote every waking moment of his life to AI. And I think he's done that pretty much continuously since then for the last 12 years.
Why couldn't Intel or AMD do this?
Good question. They tried.
Okay.
But they didn't go all in. And that was their mistake. For decades, Intel had promoted what was called Moore's Law. Now, the way people interpret Moore's Law is every 18 months, computers double in power. It's not quite what Moore said. What Moore actually said is that every 18 months, we can double the number of components on a microchip, and then therefore it will go twice as fast. However, by 2003 or 2004, it was becoming clear that you were kind of running into the limits of our physical universe. By now, we had 10 million, billion, approaching 10 billion components on a single tiny little pane of silicon. And you were reaching the physical limits of what these transistors and components could do. I mean, they were getting down to like 1 atom in width. And when you get there, you can't go lower than that, right? So they were actually going to hit a physical limit. Intel had not really processed what this meant. They hadn't processed that the classic thing that drove Moore's Law was going to come to an end. They still thought that there was some way around it. But they hit the physical limit of the universe. And they were in denial about this, actually. And NVIDIA was not. And so the reason NVIDIA succeeded ultimately was that they were designing microchips that worked in a different way and were the effective workaround to hitting this. Now, they still had trouble getting traction. But when AI came along, now we're inventing an industry basically from scratch. They're starting anew, basically. There's not a big industry here, especially at that time. It's hard to imagine 15 years ago going into AI was a career graveyard. You did not go into that field if you wanted to make money. It was an academic field.
Jokes on us.
Jokes on us.
So let's fast forward almost a decade, I suppose. And here we are. NVIDIA is the largest tech company in the world. And they hold a central position in the AI ecosystem. But at the moment, how dominant are they? Paint a picture there of
they're very dominant. I think they're probably close to 90% of the AI training market today. But I think the Google stuff is a big risk for them. I mean, the Google's Gemini, which is now a world-class AI and making a lot of waves, was not trained on NVIDIA equipment. Remember, Intel was 90% of the CPU market once. Dominance in the semiconductor industry in particular is no guarantee of future success. If I'm Tropicana and I'm selling orange juice, then the amount of orange juice I sold last year is a pretty good guide to the amount of orange juice I'm going to sell next year. If I'm selling microchips, it's like the fashion industry. I can very quickly go out of style and be replaced in one business cycle. So success in one business cycle in this industry is not a guarantee of success in the next one. And the history of computers has shown that.
I'd like to talk a little bit about how he views AI instead of how he runs his company. And that's something else that's really striking about him. I mean, even some of the big AI optimists, Altman and even Musk, see some risk with it. Like they know they're building something that has real consequence and potential negative consequence. But it's just striking that Jensen sees none. Like he thinks there's zero risk.
In my experience,
what's going on there? What's behind that?
The closer you are to the hardware, the less likely you are to see this risk.
Okay.
Here's how AI looks to like Sam Altman or maybe like a risk guy, Ilya Sutskever or somebody who are very concerned about these risks. They see it as an amalgamated mass of basically brain tissue. That's what AI looks like. It looks like we're growing a brain in a vat. Jensen doesn't see it that way. Jensen does not see this as brain tissue. He sees it as a series of mathematical operations. Jensen describes a neural net as software. So to him, he doesn't see it as any more dangerous than any other kind of software. When I talked to the guy who programmed, who kind of brought AI to NVIDIA, he was talking about maybe intelligence will spread to the universe from here. AI is going to spread to the stars and maybe we'll be underground. And it's kind of this fantastic new AI capabilities that are going to colonize the universe. That was the dreamer guy. Then I talked to the guy who implemented the CUDA stack for AI, the guy who worked with the dreamer to build the stuff. And the builder was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. We're just doing software. So it really is a question of perspective. I think it's almost a question of who you are. If you're a hardware guy, I think in general, you're not afraid of this. If you're a software guy, I think you are.
Do you think he understands AI?
Oh, yeah.
Or does he understand the components that go into making AI?
He understands it cold. I don't think anyone understands the full stack as well as Jensen does. I think
then what makes him not able? Why does he not see the risk then? If the risk comes from the application, and
Jan LeCun is the same way. So Jensen is not alone in this.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me tell you. When we understood that nuclear fission was a potential, I think it was 38 or 39. Within 6 months, there was basically unanimous agreement that nuclear fission could be used to build a bomb. And in fact, within a year, I think there were 4 different bomb-making programs. That has not been the case with AI. So about half the field think this is a risk, and half of it does not. There's no consensus. The question is, AI does not have a survival instinct like we do.
Although some people contest that, right? I mean, some people are starting to see evidence of a desire to not be turned off, for example.
I think it's risky, but I'm just giving you the case.
I'm just presenting that this isn't a universally held belief.
It's not a universally held belief, but this is the positive, optimistic belief. AI is not attempting to win the Darwinian battle for reproductive fitness, and so it's not a risk in the way that a super intelligent human might be, for example. You can imagine a super intelligent human would still have kind of a evolutionary programming of biology behind it. And the AI doesn't have that, but maybe that could be inadvertently introduced to the AI. Maybe somebody, and I wrote a whole New York Times piece about this recently, could give the command to the AI. Hey, prevent yourself from being turned off. This is your new objective. Don't let yourself be turned off. Nobody quite knows how the AI would react to that. I think it's risky, but I'm just giving you the optimistic case.
Yeah. I mean, so we've had Jeffrey Hinton on the show and Joshua Bengio, two Canadians who were part of building this and do see fundamental risk in it, existential risk even. And you spoke to Jensen about Hinton, so I'd love you to talk a little bit about how that went. This is how deep this
debate goes. I've talked both to Hinton and Bengio as well. So Bengio and LeCun and Hinton were the 3 godfathers of AI. And Bengio and LeCun in particular are friends. They have split completely on this topic, to the point where they're arguing in public. It's not even clear to me that they're still friends. So that's how deep this debate goes and this divide goes. Jensen has taken LeCun's side. And it's from first principles. He's not doing it simply because he doesn't see the risk. He just doesn't understand how doing dot products on a computer leads to something that's going to kill us. Now, I think this is too reductive. It's a little bit like saying, well, I don't understand, what is your brain? In some sense, it's just a series of electrical impulses. It's like saying, well, this is just math. AI is just math. Fine. Your brain is just chemistry and matter
Which
is
is what Hinton would say.
Atoms.
I mean, Hinton literally makes that argument.
No, I think Hinton's correct. I'm convinced by his argument. And we should observe that Hinton and Bengio saw very far into the future with this stuff. I mean, they were working on neural nets. Like I said, they were mad scientists. People did not believe this stuff was ever going to work, even within the narrow field of AI. These guys were viewed as unpopular mavericks. But LeCun was too, and he doesn't agree with them. And I think we have to hear that side of it too.
So how did Jensen respond when you presented over multiple exchanges Hinton's views of risk?
At first he was open to the discussion, but pretty dismissive. I'm almost instantly very dismissive. He said, this is arguing against similar to arguing against agriculture or the Industrial Revolution or electricity. In 10 years, you're going to be sitting in this diner. We were actually at Denny's diner when I first had this conversation with him. And there's going to be a robot vacuuming the floor, and you're just not going to notice or care. It'll be as commonplace as an alarm clock. You just won't think about it. There'll be autonomous systems, but you won't think of them as a risk to you. Maybe it's true. I can definitely see that being true. But I just kept thinking about it. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I was like, well, am I being ridiculous? Am I just entertaining some complex science fiction scenario? But then I heard guys like Bengio and Hinton talking about it. And again, as I say, these guys saw very far into the future. And so I kind of kept bringing this up with Jensen because I felt like he hadn't quite answered the question that I was asking. And he would just direct me away from it or very quickly sort of say, well, I've asked that already. Finally, I found this clip of Arthur C. Clarke.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines.
The science fiction author from 1964 talking about the evolution of mechanical brains.
Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers.
And his belief that once we ported intelligent systems onto the computer, then evolution would go into hyperdrive because we could start to speed up the development of intelligence much faster than we'd ever seen before. And at this point, I was kind of done with the risk argument. I just wanted to show Jensen this clip and see what he thought about it because I had shown it to one of his other executives and gotten this really rhapsodic take about AI spreading to the stars. And I just wanted to prompt Jensen to see if I could get something out of him that was similar. And instead, he exploded at me. And he started screaming at me. Wow. Now, Jensen has a bad temper, and I knew this from talking to a lot of people.
But you hadn't seen it yet.
I had never seen it. I didn't think I would ever personally get to see it. So it was a really intense moment. A part of me was like, whoa, this is really intense. I don't know if I should fight back, but I didn't fight back. I wasn't going to argue with him. He knew more about the stuff than I did. The journalist part of me, the kind of reportorial part of me was like, this is awesome. I love this.
What did he say? What was his
he called my questions stupid. He called them pedestrian. He said, we have this exact argument every time a new technology comes along. It's always the same. It's like arguing against fire. Like, what are you talking about? This is stupid. Don't show me Arthur C. Clarke. I don't like Arthur C. Clarke. I didn't read his books. He said the F word a few times. It just was not an argument.
Do you think he believes it, or is this his corporate self-preservation argument?
He 100% believes it, I think.
Okay.
You could argue his incentives are aligned in this direction, and I think they are. But he believes it.
Should we be worried that one of the most important people in the AI world, who is central to its development, feels this rigidly about something that is the subject of pretty wide societal, let alone expert debate?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a little worried about it. That's why I wrote the book, actually. It is. I started using ChatGPT in 2022, and I was like, oh my God, I'm cooked. This thing is catching up to me as a writer if it hasn't done so already. Like, it's a better writer than I am, maybe. Certainly, it's faster.
That's just a lot faster than me, let me tell you that.
So I was grappling with the existential threat to my career of a machine that can write everything I can write as fast as I can at the push of a button. And now, I will say it hasn't quite gotten there. Yeah, it can't actually quite do my job yet, but it's only a matter of time.
So looking ahead, NVIDIA is central to the AI ecosystem and to a booming AI economy and the investment going into it. I recently spoke to Gary Marcus, though, who made a pretty convincing case that this ecosystem is fraught with financial vulnerability. And
he has been naysaying these systems for 10 years. He's completely on the wrong side. He's not arguing from evidence. He believes LLMs.
These systems being LLMs.
He thinks they're a flop. That is just factually not true. ChatGPT has 800 million weekly average users. It's literally the single fastest growing product of all time. It's extremely popular with customers who pay to use it. It is not a flop. It is, and he's just ignoring that part of it.
Well, we'll have you on together at some point. We can have that conversation. Now, a spirited debate about that one. That would be fun.
Now, maybe LLMs will hit some kind of plateau. Probably at some point they will. They have not done so yet, though.
No, but in fairness, his argument would be that the problem is the gap between revenue growth and capital investment.
He's been
and market
naysaying this
valuation.
since it started. He naysayed ChatGPT the day it came out. He's just on the wrong side of this argument. He has to turn around. There's nothing else to it. I mean, it's just not based on facts or evidence, what Gary is saying. You know, if I'm going to tell you, ChatGPT is going to flop, and then 3 years later, it has 800 million average weekly users, and all of the entire society and economy has repurposed itself to build these kind of systems because there is so much consumer demand. This is not something AI people are doing because it's some kind of pilot project. People are using these systems constantly. It is time to admit you were wrong.
Okay, I won't put on my Gary Marcus mask and pretend to debate this. However, I guess a question that does come from this is NVIDIA's current design, the product design, is well suited to the problem of training language models.
Yes.
If, hypothetically, language models were to plateau, or we can't solve a hallucination problem ultimately over time, or the overall model of putting more compute into a language model and getting significant gains in capacity, right? If that plateaus,
yes,
and we pivot to a different kind of AI, can NVIDIA pivot to that?
100%.
Like, as a business,
I do think that
they can just start building a new thing.
I do think something like that is bound to happen. You know, this is the point that Hinton makes. Basically, the way these things work is a very primitive representation of the way the brain works. You know, but as Hinton has pointed out, our brains only learn through chemistry, right? They learn through neurochemistry. It's not an especially efficient process. It takes actually a while to learn stuff. The AI, we're basically line editing the neurons with calculus, and it's possible this is actually a more efficient way to train intelligence. It's different, but it may be more efficient. In the same way that, kind of a steam engine doesn't really look like a cardiovascular system in a human heart, but it can do a lot more, actually. It has certain limitations, but it's actually a more powerful system in some ways. So to me, that is not the biggest risk to NVIDIA, that AI plateaus. I think the biggest risk is competition from other vendors. Perhaps it will plateau. I'm not saying that can't happen. Remember I said the propeller and the airplane with AlexNet. And then in 2018, we had the transformer come along. That's kind of like the jet engine. Maybe we need a third thing to come along, probably, but I think it's going to operate at a similar scale at this point. I don't think we're going to something more compact. I could be wrong, but it just doesn't seem like anyone's pushing in that direction right now. It's a possibility, sure.
It's certainly not where the investment is, right?
I mean, yes and no. It's certainly not where the CapEx is going. I think there are a lot of people asking, I think they're waiting for it to plateau, but it just hasn't done so yet. And this is the thing that really gets my goat about Gary. He's like claiming, ChatGPT 5 plateaued, it's over. It's just not factually true. It's just not factually true. If you look at the benchmarks, if you look at what GPT-5 can do, if you look at what things like Nano Banana and Gemini can do, we are nowhere. There's no evidence of a plateau. It's just not there right now.
We are getting new things, right?
And they're
things
amazing.
are getting better, right?
And they're amazing.
Right, and they are amazing, right?
Right. That's not what's happening right now. It's factually wrong to say that.
So you spent a few years now immersed in this world and with these people and with a personality in particular who's at the center of it.
Yeah.
What excites you most about what you saw?
I think the most exciting things, look, I have a lot of fear about this stuff, particularly for my own livelihood. I'm not sure whether we'll be able to believe anything we see online. In fact, right now I'm afraid of that. I
think we're very close to that.
I think that, I like being a writer, and I'm just not sure that if I started writing if I was in my 20s and starting my career, if I would even bother. I have ChatGPT. Why would I bother? Why would I bother going through this difficult, long apprenticeship of learning how to write?
Over decades, learning to craft sentences.
I did not publish
text and
anything for money until I was 36 years old. And I was doing other things at that time. I had other jobs, but it took me forever. It's hard. And if you have ChatGPT at your fingertips, you may not bother. I'm worried that I'll get to the positive stuff in a second, but I'm worried also that it's going to kind of corrode art. You know, CGI was introduced to the movies in basically 1993 with Jurassic Park. It is not clear to me that it has actually made cinema better. It may have made it worse. You know, you would think, oh, this tool where I can just draw anything on the screen is going to improve this medium. That does not factually seem to be true to me, which is pretty striking. And if
we make a lot of bad movies.
didn't make cinema better, I'm not sure AI will either.
Yeah, interesting.
What's the good stuff? I think that we're on the verge of a wave of coming humanoid robots that are just going to more or less eliminate drudgery. I'd really like to have a robot cleaning my house. I hate doing the dishes. I hate cleaning the toilet. It would be nice to have something else to do that. So, you know, I think that's happening. I think we're on the verge of fantastic breakthroughs using these tools in mathematics and the scientists, in the sciences. Like, who knows what we will uncover. I think we'll get closer to things like quantum computing, better quantum understanding of the universe. That stuff is also fascinating. And then, of course, the really big frontier where things are positive is medicine. Demis Hassabis, the Google DeepMind CEO, has said that we're going to cure every disease within 10 years. I don't know if that's true. It seems a little probably inflated claim, but
it's a hell of a goal, though.
I think some diseases will be cured. And I think that'll be great. Longevity, lifespan, you know, like making things better for people. You know, progress is good. Industrial progress is good. I don't believe in degrowth narratives. I once wrote, this is a bit of a tangent, but follow me here. I wrote a profile of Syukuro Manabe, a Japanese scientist who discovered global warming in the 1960s. He was the first to really posit the relationship between CO2 in the atmosphere and temperature rising in a concrete way. And I kind of asked him, well, isn't this bad? And he was like, you know, global warming is bad, but industrialization is good. He'd been born in an island of Shikoku in Japan, actually before World War II. And he was about 5'2" or 5'3". And he was like, you know, I didn't get enough food to eat growing up, you know, and it's causing my development and growth to be stunted. And I remember what they called in Japan the arrival of the three sacred treasures, which were the refrigerator, the television, and the washing machine. So imagine life without those things. After the introduction of Western foodstuffs to Japan post the war, the average height of the average Japanese man grew by 4 inches.
Wow.
So industrial progress is good. Right. And it is kind of like decadent to imagine a world where we arrest it or stop it. I agree with Jensen on this part. And I think this is partly where he's coming from. You know, there's these doom and gloom narratives that are insufficiently optimistic, perhaps, about the benefits that industrial progress has provided us over time. And it's easy to take all that stuff for granted.
Do you get the sense that we have any say in what's about to happen to us? Or
No.
is it just people like Jensen and Musk and Altman that are designing our future?
Yeah, we have no say. You know, the forces, maybe no one ever has any say. Forces of technology and social change are beyond the capacity of almost any single individual, except maybe Elon Musk and Jensen Huang. I mean, you know, technology, what would you do? What would you do to stop it? I mean, I guess you could institute some kind of ban on AI development. Let's say we did that, the most aggressive thing possible. Imagine that extreme scenario. Then China would build it. So I don't know if there's anything that we could do right now. You know, you would need somehow to get every researcher and social group on the table to come together to say, okay, we're halting the progress of AI. Now, that has happened in human history. There's basically a blanket ban on chemical weapons research and development, for example. But that only happened after a bunch of people got chlorine gassed in World War I, right? It's very hard to do that preemptively.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, it doesn't need to be that binary between a ban and let it rip. There's potential safety precautions that could be imposed.
Yeah, but remember, you got to get it worldwide. You got to get a worldwide safety precaution implemented across the globe. You got to get China to come and agree to do that, and they're not going to agree. So even with Musk and Wang, if you were to slow them down, and this is their argument, and I know this is a little self-serving, but it is true. China will just develop this stuff instead, and then you'll be at the mercy of a Chinese AI.
Yeah. Well, if that's the case, I hope he's right and Hinton is wrong.
I hope he's right and Hinton is wrong too. I think for me, I do worry about this stuff. I am concerned about runaway AI, much more so than Jensen is. In fact, Musk used to be really concerned about it. He founded OpenAI.
He still thinks there's a 20% chance, and he's rolling the dice.
I know, it's crazy, right?
It's crazy.
It's Icarus-like. Perhaps our species just doesn't. We did it with nuclear weapons too. So maybe we're just in that phase of crazy runaway development, and it's only when we see some catastrophic outcome that will. I think probably that's what has to happen. Something has to go wrong. Hopefully something not too catastrophic before this is slowed down.
I think just to close, what I find what is both fascinating about him as a person, but also I find deeply unnerving, is the degree of confidence he shows in his path and the certainty with which he views things like risk, right? And this isn't a hedged position he has. This is an absolutist one. I find that unnerving.
What makes Jensen? He's never had a hedged position. He gambled, he bet the whole company on AI, profitable company in making graphics cards, went all in on AI in 2013. Okay? Not now, like when no one had heard of this stuff. He went all in on the AI hardware training market when that market produced $0 in revenue each year. Right? Like that was crazy, but from first principles reasoning, he was correct. And I think that's how he's still operating.
Well, look, thanks for the book.
Of course.
Thanks for giving us a window into this pretty fascinating guy and company.
This was a great podcast. Thank you for having me on here.
Thanks. I appreciate it.